Thank you. And now for opening remarks, May 4th Task Force Faculty Advisor Idris Kabir Syed.
This year's theme is Black Lives Matter, Long Live the Spirit of Kent and Jackson State. I'd like to thank many people for their assistance this year. First, the students. Students from the May 4th Task Force and the May 4th Visitors Center, Black United students, the Gospel Choir are all participants in this year's commemoration. I applaud them for the hard, unpaid, but important commitments they make to extracurricular activities like
with a baccalaureate degree in May of 1970. I have powerful memories of the first time that I participated in the commemoration last year, especially those deeply moving traditions of the Candlelight March and Vigil. And those traditions continue today as students remember still. So let me first start by thanking the May 4th Task Force for inviting me to welcome you. This is the 46th commemoration of May 4th, 1970. And if it were not for students who care, and community members who care, and faculty members and staff members who care, we may be in a different place today. But we all remain deeply committed. But none so much as the students of the May 4th Task Force. And if you think about it, 46 years later, there is still a passion and a belief that this day and the legacy of this day, the memory of this day, is so very important. I want to particularly thank Kabir Syed for his leadership with the May 4th Task Force. And I think there are many people, particularly those in front of me right now, who know that Kabir Syed leads in so many different and so many special ways. We're thankful, Kabir, for that leadership. The May 4th Task Force also
American South Vietnamese troop offensive into Cambodia was in progress. Some felt that this decision was essential for attaining a just peace and sustaining America's credibility in the world. Yet others, particularly students, believed that this action represented an escalation of the war and a return to ex-President Johnson's earlier hopes for a military victory. As the fires from the artillery began to burn in Cambodia, a raging fire of protest spread across the United States. At Kent State University, the reaction to Nixon's announcement was similar to that of other campuses across the nation. Friday, May 1st, 1970. At noon, about 500 students gathered around the Victory Bell on the Commons, the traditional site for rallies. A group of history students who had organized the protest buried a copy of the Constitution, which they claimed had been murdered when U.S. troops were sent into Cambodia without a declaration of war by Congress. 3 hours later, Black United students held a rally which had been scheduled before Nixon had made his announcement. Some 400 people gathered to hear Black students talk about the recent disorders with the Ohio National Guard on their campus. Word spread quickly that another rally, one to oppose the invasion of Cambodia, was scheduled for Monday, May 4th at noon. Friday night, one of the first warm evenings of spring, several hundred students gathered in downtown Kent. A spontaneous anti-war rally began in the street. Twice, while the rally was in progress, passing police cruisers were hit with beer bottles. Afterwards, police stayed away from the area. Meanwhile, more people were leaving the bars. Many in the crowd chanted anti-war slogans, and a bonfire was set in the street. The crowd blocked traffic for about an hour and moved toward the center of town. Some members of the crowd began to break windows. Primarily political targets were attacked, including banks, loan companies, and utility companies. After being informed of the events, the Kent mayor declared a state of emergency and arbitrarily ordered all bars closed. Kent police, along with the mayor, then confronted the crowd. The riot act was read and police proceeded to clear the area. People inside the bars were ordered to leave, forcing hundreds more into the streets. The crowd was herded toward the campus with tear gas and nightsticks, which was in the opposite direction in which some of them lived. 14 persons, mostly stragglers, were arrested. About $5,000 in damage was done, as 43 windows were broken, 28 in one bank. Saturday, May 2nd, 1970. On the morning of May 2nd, some Kent State students assisted with the downtown cleanup. Rumors of radical activities were widespread, and Kent's ROTC building was believed to be the target of militant students that evening. During the Vietnam War, students on many college campuses opposed the presence of ROTC and were successful in forcing the removal of ROTC from their campuses. A dusk to dawn curfew was imposed on the city of Kent, and students were restricted to the campus. At 5 p.m., shortly after assessing the situation, the mayor alerted the Ohio National Guard. KSU officials were unaware of this decision. Shortly after 8 p.m., about 300 people gathered on the Commons, where a few anti-war slogans were chanted and a few brief speeches given. An impromptu march began, and participants headed toward the dormitories to gain strength. Large numbers of people joined the march. The now 2,000 marchers swarmed the hill overlooking the Commons and crossed the Commons. Then they surrounded the ROTC building, an old wooden World War II barracks that was scheduled to be demolished. Windows were broken, and a few persons eventually set the building on fire. Plainclothes police who were standing nearby made no attempt to stop the students at this point. Firemen arrived on the scenes, but their actions were abandoned because some of the crowd attacked firemen and slashed their hoses. The blaze quickly died out. The firemen eventually regained control, and the building was ignited again. This time, however, firemen arrived with massive police protection. Police surrounded the building and dispersed the students with tear gas. The firemen again got the fire under control. The crowd then moved to the front of the campus. The students retreated to the Commons to find the ROTC building smoldering at both ends. Within minutes, the building was fully ablaze. The crowd then assembled on the wooded hillside beside the Commons and watched as the building burned. Many shouted anti-war slogans. In the first 2 weeks of May, 30 ROTC buildings would be burned nationwide. Armed with tear gas and drawn bayonets, the Guard pursued students, protesters, and bystanders alike into dormitories and other campus buildings. Some stones were thrown, and at least one student was bayoneted. The question of who set the fire that destroyed the ROTC building has never been satisfactorily answered by any investigated body. Sunday, May 3rd, 1970. May 3rd was a relatively quiet day. By now, however, the campus was fully occupied by Ohio National Guard troops, and armored personnel carriers were stationed throughout the campus. Although some students and guardsmen fraternized, the feeling, for the most part, was one of mutual hostility. That morning, Ohio Governor James Rhodes, who was running for U.S. Senate, arrived in Kent and, along with city officials, held a news conference. Rhodes, running on a law and order platform, attempted to use this opportunity to garner votes in the primary election, which was only 2 days away. In a highly inflammatory speech, Rhodes claimed that the demonstrations at Kent were the handiwork of a highly organized band of revolutionaries who were out to destroy higher education in Ohio. These protesters, Rhodes declared, were the worst type of people we harbor in America. Worse than the brown shirts and the communist element. We will use whatever force necessary to drive them out of Kent. Later that evening, a National Guard commander would tell his troops that Ohio law gave them the right to shoot if necessary. This merely caused to heighten the guardsmen's hostility towards the students. Around 8 p.m., a crowd gathered on the Commons near the Victory Bell. As the group increased in size, Guard officials announced the immediate enforcement of a new curfew. The crowd refused to disperse. At 9 p.m., the Ohio Riot Act was read. Tear gas was fired from helicopters hovering overhead, and the Guard dispersed the crowd from the area. Students attempted to demonstrate that the curfew was unnecessary by peacefully marching towards the town, but were met by guardsmen. Students then staged a spontaneous sit-in at the intersection of East Main and Lincoln Streets and demanded that the mayor and the KSU president speak with them about the Guard's presence on the campus. Assured that this demand would be met, the crowd agreed to move from the street and onto the front lawn of the campus. The guard then betrayed the students and announced that the curfew would go into effect immediately. Helicopters and tear gas were used to disperse the demonstrators. As the crowd attempted to escape, some were bayoneted and clubbed by guardsmen. Students were again pursued and prodded back to their dormitories. Tear gas inundated the campus, and helicopters with searchlights hovered overhead all night. Monday, May 4th, 1970. At 11 a.m., about 200 students gathered on the Commons. Earlier that morning, state and local officials had met in Kent. Some officials had assumed that Governor Rhodes had declared martial law to be in effect, but he had not. In fact, martial law was not officially declared until May 5th. Nevertheless, the National Guard resolved to disperse any assembly. As noon approached, the size of the crowd increased to 1,500. Some were merely spectators, while others had gathered specifically to protest the invasion of Cambodia and the continued presence of the National Guard on the campus. Upon orders of Ohio's Assistant Adjutant General Robert Canterbury, an army jeep was driven in front of the assembled students. The students were told by means of a bullhorn to disperse immediately. Students responded with jeers and chants. When the students refused to disperse, General Canterbury ordered the guardsmen to disperse them. Approximately 116 men, equipped with loaded M1 rifles and tear gas, formed a skirmish line towards the students. Aware of bayonet injuries of the previous evening, students immediately ran away from the attacking National Guardsmen. Retreating up Blanket Hill, some students lobbed tear gas canisters back at the advancing troops, and one straggler was attacked with clubs. The guard, after clearing the Commons, marched over the crest of the hill, firing tear gas and scattering students into a wider area. The guard then continued marching down the hill and onto a practice football field. For approximately 10 minutes, the guard stayed in this position. During this time, tear gas canisters were thrown back and forth from the guard's position to a small group of students in the Prentice Hall parking lot, about 100 yards away. Some students responded to the guardsmen's attack by throwing stones. Guardsmen also threw stones at the students, however, were spectators of the veranda of Taylor Hall. Oh, I skipped a line. General Canterbury concluded that the crowd had been dispersed and ordered the guard to march back to the Commons area. Some members of Troop G then huddled briefly. After reassembling on the field, the guardsmen seemed to begin to retreat as they marched back up the hill, retracting their previous steps. Members of Troop G, while advancing up the hill, continued to glance back at the parking lot where the most militant and vocal students were located. The students assumed the confrontation was over. Many of the students began to walk to their next classes. As the guard reached the crest of Blanket Hill near the pagoda of Taylor Hall, about a dozen members of Troop G simultaneously turned around 180 degrees, aimed and fired their weapons into the crowd in the Prentice Hall parking lot. The 1975 civil trials proved that there was a verbal command to fire. A total of 67 shots were fired in 13 seconds. 4 students, Allison Krauss, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Scheuer, and William Schroeder, were killed. 9 students were wounded: Joseph Lewis, John Cleary, Thomas Grace, Robbie Stamps, Donald Scott McKenzie, Alan Canfora, Douglas Rentmore, James Russell, and Dean Kaler. Of the wounded, 1 was permanently paralyzed, and several were seriously maimed. All were full-time students.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but but now I see the Lord has promised good to me. His word, my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be as long as life endures.
Their pain, taking the time to honestly and openly have a dialogue about our different experiences with law enforcement paves the way for empathy and understanding. Having a safe place to explain one's hurt, be consoled, and then supported by the community are all basic needs and wants that should be afforded to people of all races, backgrounds, religion, gender, social class, and ages. The reality is this: we live in a world where the very people sworn to protect us have proven time and time again to be the very means of our demise. That is what this conversation is about. Some victims of May 4th were students, brothers, sons, and friends, just as Tamir Rice. All people first and foremost. The Black narrative is an alternative exception where not only do we lose our children, but we are not afforded the same grieving time because we are busy explaining our pain, justifying our hurt, and defending our struggles. The truth is, no one asks why May 4th is commemorated. There is no discussion about whether the students deserve to be killed, because the fact that young lives were taken at the hands of law enforcement is enough. Yet Black lives are not afforded that same luxury. This perspective is not meant to be taken as a Black versus white conversation, but rather a battle against humanity and all that we are as a nation claim to stand for. This is an opportunity of growth and reflection for those on all sides of the table. But let it be clear that some of the outright ignorance and hate speech displayed on social media leading up to this momentous event was sickening. The mere mention of members of the Black community taking part in a conversation so relevant to our experience caused people to cancel their alumni memberships, threaten the safety of students, and completely disregard the correlation between May 4th and Tamir Rice's death. The death of a shooting, for fear of recognizing a bigger issue at hand. This past week, people on social media had not the slightest problems expressing their views on the Black Lives Matter movement, Tamir Rice herself, and Black students on campus. They neglected to even for a second acknowledge the correlation, nor offer it the same respect we offer the events that we are here to honor today and the anniversary of those tragedies. So to the unwilling to even participate in the police brutality conversation, as long as Black people are involved, you will hear our story. You will no longer be afforded the comfortability of hiding behind your privilege. Save your white supremacist tears, suppress your racist groans, and embody the vibration of the melanin around you. Restructure the disgrace you feel when a fully competent, relevant Black woman comes to educate you on police brutality. Come to terms with the reality that Black students weren't shot because Black United students protected its people by urging them inside. Empathize with the hard truth that even though we as a people escaped death May 4th, 1970, we didn't on May 14th, 1970. Nor did we on February 26, 2012, November 26, 2014, or July 13, 2015. Why? Because the average person doesn't recognize these dates in the first place. Because the very same people so easily slandering a woman's name, disregarding the death of a child, and idolizing that child's killer are the people that we deal with every day. There will be no progress without the humility of understanding our realities. So understand that these people just described are closer than you think. These are the students that touch our hair like a young child at a petting zoo. These are the teachers that would rather give us an easy nickname than take the time to recognize our names given at birth. These are the faculty that say no to funding Black cultural programs because they don't see its importance. These are the community members shutting down their businesses for fear of too many Black people gathering together. This kind of hate doesn't begin and end on social media, nor does it subside at the end of a 9-to-5 shift. It does not cease at the call of 911, and it certainly doesn't stop at the pull of a trigger. Yet coming to terms with these passive-aggressive, institutionalized forms of racism is a reality that many of us have adopted as being a part of our Black experience. So yes, we do know pain. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, it is true that you have chosen the side of the oppressor. But what does this really mean? It means that humanity as a whole loses because we fail to learn from our past mistakes. Pain is not had without opportunity for something new to be born, and that's what we have right now, opportunity. What we choose to do with our pain is up to us. We can choose the path of humility, education, and cooperation, or we can choose a long road of competition, debates, and discourse, because we can all agree that tragedy is not the answer. Though this opportunity we are now faced with is one that stems from hurt, misunderstanding, and violence, I'd like to offer some encouragement. We still have time. The message we send to people all around the world can change. We still have time to offer hope instead of hate, compassion instead of complaints, and peace instead of pain. I guarantee you, if you ask any parent that has lost a child, they would give anything in the world to have more time. How much time we have left is up for discussion. But in moments like these, where we are here right now, is where change occurs. Thank you.
Before the truth is clear and justice is served. My Aunt Doris Krauss, Allison's mother, passed away peacefully under hospice care and in the arms of her sole surviving daughter, Lori, on January 17th, just a few months ago. And as she crossed over, she left behind decades of profound grief and struggle. Perhaps it is our world she now grieves. A world she taught her children to believe was just and civil, compassionate, and fair. As I was growing up in Cleveland, my father, Doris's nephew, used to counsel me. When I felt wronged by a friend or noted an injustice in the world, he used to say to me, "Life isn't fair." And he knew. We all sat by feeling helpless as the Krausses endured a very public grief and extensive legal battles. Instead of receiving any formal acknowledgement of one of the gravest of misdeeds a government can inflict upon its citizens, they were subject to factually unfounded and prejudicial accusations thrust upon their daughter. In her eulogy for Aunt Doris, my cousin Lori noted, "My mother lost a child, and that is perhaps the greatest burden of all. When we add to this how unnecessary Allison's death was, the betrayal of it being carried out by a government meant to protect her, and the crushing pressure of the denial of accountability for now decades, I am truly astounded by the grace and fortitude with which Doris faced this legacy." Please join me in a moment of silence for Doris Levine Krauss. May her memory be a blessing to us. May her struggle be released. May her quest for truth be carried forth. I never met my cousin Allison. I was a little 9-month-old, learning to walk and run, when she was stopped in her tracks by an M1 bullet, right over there in the parking lot. So I have always been looking for the truth myself, searching for accounts that would provide clarity and do Allison and May 4th justice. It concerns me that history be told and recorded accurately. Among the articles I have found was a 1971 piece published in the National Review by William F. Buckley. Mr. Buckley noted that they found pebbles in her pocket. They called it evidence of her aggression, evidence of her crime. Deadly? Really? That is a sham. The classic, tawdry response we see again and again to blame the victim. What really had them shaking in their boots was not some rocks in the pocket of a college freshman with flowers in her hair, but that she wielded words of truth. She confronted their ethics, their judgment, and refused to accept President Nixon's escalation of the war in Southeast Asia. She was one of many hundreds of thousands across the nation who took to the streets in that weekend in May to protest. I couldn't be more proud of her. cousin Allison Krauss was a 19-year-old honor student. Bright, compassionate, hardworking. She was killed that day as she raised her voice in opposition to a government that had gone morally astray. They always point out that my daughter had gravel in her pocket, said my Aunt Doris. That this was the rationale for killing her? Why, she asked, didn't they throw gravel at her? For 46 years, we've been parted from my cousin, Allison. A lifetime. My lifetime. For 46 years, we have sought answers. For 46 years, the government has been adept at denying culpability, avoiding responsibility, and suppressing truth. For 46 years, we've been lied to and brushed aside. We now know there was an order to shoot. We've heard it. Don't tell us you were afraid for your lives with your loaded M1 rifles and your helmets and your high ground advantage. Don't tell us you felt endangered when Governor Rhodes himself, your commander-in-chief, came to town to cheer you on and give you carte blanche to, quote, eradicate the problem. For 46 years, we've called for truth. My Uncle Arthur led the legal battle for 10 years following the May 4th event, and while we agreed to a settlement, we were not satisfied that truth was honored nor that justice was done. In a 1981 interview with J. Gregory Payne, my infuriated uncle declared, "We don't want the damn money, we want the truth. We want the facts about how the four died. We aren't afraid of the truth. We aren't the ones who've been saying no comment for the past 10 years." He went on and said, "I think we're all responsible for the killings at Kent. You can't get away from the hatred being spread by national leaders during that time," he said. He said that political period was one which bred hate, and with Nixon and Rhodes fanning the fires, you can expect killings as a result. Well, with all the hate speech going on these days by political leaders, I shudder to think what's ahead. And like my cousin, I will not allow the hate to go unchallenged. Let me tell you about my cousin, Allison Beth Krauss, who was the cherished first of two daughters born to Arthur and Doris Krauss of Cleveland Heights, Ohio. She smiles at me whenever I see her there in a handful of black and white photos. The impish 7-year-old girl sits there in a white dress and patent leather shoes next to her little sister Lori, in front of a row of in the front row of a family portrait taken at my aunt and uncle's 1958 wedding. I long to reach into the photographs and take her hands and play with her and hug her and know her. Back in those days in the early 60s, the Krausses used to go on Sunday drives out in the country around Cleveland, often ending up in Kent, dining at the Robin Hood and enjoying the pastoral landscape. Remarkably, at a very young age, Allison made her decision to attend Kent State University. She loved it here. She felt at home and she felt safe. In a eulogy for my cousin, Richard Jaworski, one of her high school teachers at John F. Kennedy High School in Wheaton, Maryland, described her like this. Constantly, she was surrounded by boys and girls who came not only to tell her their problems, but to laugh with her and bask in her wit and charm. Allison possessed a rare trait. She could move among many groups of students, and always exhibited tolerance for the views of each group in which she participated. When baited by adults, some young people responded with anger and bitterness, if not violence. Allison expressed a passive, stoic quality, as if recognizing the injustice of name-calling, as if realizing the illness of a person filled with hate. As she found her political voice in high school, Allison joined other students who were opposed to the war in Vietnam, especially as friends got drafted. As a teenager, she participated in anti-war demonstrations. She knew that as an American, she had a right to freedom of speech and a right to engage in peaceful assembly. She entered Kent State University in the fall of 1969, where she quickly made friends, earned high marks in her studies, and met the love of her life, Barry Levine, another young student from New York who shared her values. Together, they assembled with others on Friday, May 1st on the Commons right here to raise their voices against Nixon's decision to escalate the war and send more troops into Cambodia. She spent that first weekend of May with friends, doing schoolwork, enjoying the first breath of spring, and becoming increasingly concerned about the military presence on campus now occupied by the National Guard. On that beautiful day, the moistened cloth she had brought for protection against tear gas. Another dispersal order was given, yet no advance was made, so Allison felt safe in running a few yards to give a friend part of her already compromised cloth. She tore hers again and gave him half. It was a small gesture, but one that so clearly demonstrated her consideration and willingness to share. Tear gas was already being fired as she scrambled back to where I was waiting. We stood for a few seconds watching the soldiers move out from behind the screen of gas before deciding to retreat with a crowd of students. As we began to retreat over the hill, I could see Allison almost beginning to cry. A few steps further, she turned to me with tears rolling down her cheeks and asked, "Why are they doing this to us? Why don't they let us be?" A peaceful assembly was being violently disrupted, breeding anger in most of those being dispersed. However, Allison did not feel anger, but rather disappointment and sorrow. Disappointment because the students were not given a chance to gather peacefully, and sorrow because of the violence she felt would eventually ensue. Unfortunately, these passive emotions were soon transformed into aggression. As we retreated, a gas canister landed at our feet, exploding in our faces. It was at this point that Allison's sorrow changed to anger, and her strained tolerance turned to resistance. After a few seconds of recovery, Allison turned in her tracks and froze. She stood on the path of the pursuing troops, screaming at the top of her lungs. Having been pushed too far, she now lashed back, and I was forced to push her along, fearing that the distance between us and the oncoming troops was becoming critical. Twice before we reached the crest of the hill, she turned to speak her mind to these men. Each time I had to pull her onward. Upon reaching the top of the hill, she again turned, and with tears streaming down her cheeks, she screamed and yelled and stomped her feet as if all her yelling might stop these men. The hand drawn to her face holds a wet rag used to protect herself from the gas, and the other holds mine, with which I pulled her over the hill and into the parking lot, a safe distance from the troops. For several minutes, we stood in the parking lot watching these men threaten us with their rifles. In response, we cursed them and we threw rocks. When they left, we followed, all the time screaming and yelling. And then they turned. None of the 4 dead or 9 wounded were armed that day with anything truly threatening but their voices that challenged the state's right to kill. State-sponsored violence against peaceful but vocal citizens was permissible in 1970. This precedent paved the way for continued ongoing police aggression across the country, which is with us to this day. While we commemorate this sad anniversary, let us understand that in the days that followed the Kent State killings, precious lives were lost at Jackson State as well. Yet Jackson State has not remained in the national memory in the same way that Kent State has. As Samaria Rice joins us here today, a courageous and outspoken mother, standing up to the police who took the life of her son Tamir, we are reminded that while our Kent State students were murdered for their political beliefs, to this day, American citizens continue to be targeted simply on the basis of their race.
The 60s, and I want you to know how much it means that you are carrying forward, remembering each year in larger numbers than I can ever remember, the martyrs of the 60s movement who died here on May 4th. We had other martyrs, of course, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman at the beginning of Mississippi Summer. But somehow this is the event which more than any other I can think of connects what we tried to do, tried to be during those difficult years and what you all are carrying on here today. So, thank you. In a general strike on May 1st, 1886, seeking an 8-hour day. It has special meaning to me. When I was 6 years old, there was a huge May Day parade in New York City, and I was carried on the shoulders of a student from Columbus, Ohio, named Sam Levenger, who was killed a year and a half later in Spain as a member of the International Brigade trying to preserve Spanish democracy. May Day began with a strike in Chicago. That was the focus of it. And what happened was that at the McCormick's Works, a factory in South Chicago that made agricultural equipment, the workers had gone on strike. There were scabs, strike breakers in the plant, and as the strike breakers left the plant on the afternoon of Monday, May the 3rd, 1886, a struggle broke out between the scabs who had taken away the jobs of the striking workers and the workers themselves. The Chicago police got into the act. Several of the McCormick's Works strikers were killed, and a rally was called for an area in downtown Chicago called the Haymarket, because in that day of horse and carts, that's where one got hay for the horses. The rally was a peaceful one, like the events that you remember today. The crowd was dispersing with no indications of violence, no brandishing of weapons, when a police column from a nearby station made its appearance. A bomb was thrown. 7 police officers and at least 3 civilian onlookers were killed. The leaders of the radical movement in the city of Chicago, whether or not they were even at the Haymarket rally, and whether they were still at the Haymarket rally when the bomb was thrown at the end of it, those leaders were put on trial for their lives. One of them, Albert Parsons, made his escape from the city of Chicago, cut off his mustache, assumed, I believe, another name, and would very likely have been able to remove himself from the city without any further disturbance to his own life. What he did instead was to get on a train, ride back to the city, walk into the courtroom where his brothers were being tried for their lives, and in the end, join those who had a sack placed over their heads and were hanged. One of the bravest acts in what I would like to call our movement that I can think of. Words of the Haymarket anarchists. How can we connect that worldwide impulse represented by the idea of May Day with your remarkable ability to keep in being the celebration of May 4th here at Kent? My wife Allison and I experienced something like what I am proposing in the summer of 1965. Just as we now fear the disappearance of the network of Sanders supporters, so half a century ago, as tens of thousands of U.S. troops poured into Vietnam during the summer without protest against the war, we feared that when students came back to campus in the fall, protests might be so repressed as to be next to impossible. So from August 6th, the 20th anniversary of the atomic bomb of Hiroshima, to August 9th, the anniversary of the Nagasaki bombing, we held a series of events in the Washington, D.C. Mall. We called
you guys my experience, where I'm at and where I'm going. It was a normal Saturday afternoon, midday per se. That day, Tamir and Ty J wanted to go to the recreation kind of early that day. The recreation is Padilla Recreation Center. They offer free Wi-Fi, the gym for recreation play, and they also have an art room, which is open Monday through Friday. Unfortunately, it's not open on Saturdays. But that particular day, they wanted to use the Wi-Fi because I didn't have Wi-Fi at home at the time. So I usually let them go over to the recreation center to use the Wi-Fi. And that day it was some snow outside, but not much. So they was also playing in the park that day as well. So it was between the park and the recreation center, which is very close together.
No, that's right.
Tajay and Tamir came home about 2 o'clock that day for lunch. I told them to stick together. They had turkey sandwiches and apples and oranges and water, and I gave them money to go to the store to get chips and juice. So they was just as fine. I say about 3 o'clock, about 3:15, I get a knock at the door from 2 of the neighborhood kids. Could have been 2 kids playing at the rec. That the Cleveland police just shot my son twice. I was in very much denial. My 16-year-old son that was laying on the couch, I guess he heard it in the young man's voice that, you know, this was not like a joke or anything. So he zoomed out the house past me without a coat on, just his shoes. And I'm like, no, y'all don't know what y'all talking about. My kids is at the park playing. So as I get dressed and walk towards the park, which is right across the street from my house, my son was laying on the ground. And I tried to go for him, and I was trying to charge at the police, trying to get to my son, and they told me to calm down or they would put me in the back of the police car. As I look at my son and I see my daughter, she's in the back of the police car handcuffed. And I look to the right of me, I see 8 police officers surrounding my 16-year-old. At that time, I asked the officer to let my daughter go because she was only 14 at the time. They gave me an ultimatum that day to either go with Tamir or to stay with the 14-year-old. So of course I went with Tamir, and I sat in the front of the ambulance like I was a passenger. I don't know who rode in the back with my son. That was the most horrific day of my life. Sending 2 children out to play that day and only one coming home. That's a pain no mother or father should have to endure. So I am in a struggle, a fight with the law enforcement, the government right now on accountability for Tamir's murder. The struggle has been quite so real for me. I would think that, or I was thinking that the prosecutor was actually on my side after being thrown into this situation again. You know, I was just really thrown into this situation. I was kind of oblivious what was going on in America until it happened to my son. And you know, I was just raising kids, trying to go to school and raising my children to be American citizens. But when I was thrown into this situation, I came out with a lot of rage and anger, and I decided to speak about social justice and just continue to, thank you. Continue to fight for justice for Tamir. We are still having some issues in America, more issues that I can ever imagine, with the police killing unarmed citizens, majority black. And also just killing Americans, period. You know, at this point, it really don't matter what race you are. But I just know that when it comes to black and minorities, just period, it's just too much killing. And I'm here to see if I can change some of the laws in America so we can be safe. I was treated very cruelly by the Cleveland Police Department. Tim McGinty, which is a prosecutor, just blankly lied to my face after saying that he was going to, you know, do all he can do, and if the officers wouldn't talk, he would arrest them. You know, just blankly just telling me lies to my face. How they harass, you know, my experts, and, you know, just talk crazy to my attorneys and things like that. It was just quite awful. And also having my daughter and my son be a part of the grand jury process. My daughter came out of there shaking as like we caused Tamir's death or something, like they were trying to blame it on us or something. But that process was very drainful. It was a struggle for my children and myself as well. You know, we had to do a lot of preparing for that. The city of Cleveland has failed me and many more. Let's talk about how I need my white privileged Americans to stand and unify with us. I believe that's the only way change will occur. Also, all of us standing together and unifying, that would set an example for the government to say, listen, look, we're not going to take this anymore, you know? You can't just keep killing unarmed Americans, period. You just can't do it. You cannot use deadly force as a first resort. They were 5 feet away from my son when my son was shot in the chest. And your law enforcement, you're supposed to assess the situation and approach it with the, you know, right probable cause or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You're supposed to analyze it, you know, to ride up on my son and scare him half to death. And then I don't have a son anymore. And it's just like, it's okay to just go on with your life in America. No, it's not. You can see clearly that Tamir was just playing in the park that day. You know, just playing. He wasn't bothering anybody. Wasn't nobody scared. It was a fully functioning recreation center that day. You have people getting on and off the rapid station, walking through the park with their groceries. You had a mailman there. You have kids actually running in and out the side of the wreck. So he could have never been a threat to anybody because everybody knows who I am over there. All they had to do was call me.
And he committed
All they had to do
no
was call
crime.
me.
He committed no crime.
So, it has been a struggle for my family. I have Tajay, which is 16 now. I have Tavon, which is 17, soon to be 18. And I have Tashiana, which is 21. It's a struggle to, you know, just be strong and process this whole thing. You know, I'm my children rock. And, you know, I have to remain standing no matter what. Okay. America has a lot to have a lot of work to do. Let me just say that. And I need to say that racism is a disease. You are not born with racism. You are taught racism. And the killing part about it, we're still looking for a cure for racism. Let's try to look for a cure for racism as we looking for cures for other diseases, because that is a disease. I'm here today to be honored on behalf of my son and acknowledge the Kent State students as well as the Jackson State students. It's just a shame. They're supposed to be able to exercise their First Amendment rights. I mean, at this point, I'm not understanding. What do we have the First Amendment rights for if we can't exercise them? And who is the law enforcement to kind of like knock that down or let alone put their hands on you? You know, we're here to exercise our First Amendment rights. I think we should be able to do that. I am in my journey, in my process of transforming, definitely starting with the healing process and just giving back to my community, period. I'm establishing the Tamir Rice Foundation, which will implement a mentoring program and an art program, and also scholarships, 4 to 6 year scholarships for students to conquer their dreams. I believe in, thank you. I'm still structuring it though, but that's what my vision is, 4 to 6 year scholarships for, you know, students that's qualified and apply for it that could fulfill your dreams, you know. You know, you guys are our future, and, you know, setting good examples, you know, for you guys. You guys will set good examples for y'all kids when y'all have kids. So we need a leader of great people to lead this nation. You know, at this point, black, white, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, whatever it is, you know, I'm all for it. My son had children of all nationalities that he played with. He went to a school that was very diverse with Muslim children, Asian children, Arabic children, white and black children. And for them children to come up to me and say, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," it crushed me. I mean, little kids, even the Tamir School was from K through 8. So you talking about the kindergartens all the way up to the 8th graders coming up to me saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." That's so devastating. And I just embrace it. You know, I just embrace it. I really need for white America, my white privileged Americans, this does apply to you too. Right. I just seen an episode where the white boy attacked the police, but the police, he couldn't do nothing but, you know, shoot him. He attacked him. So that's an example of being privileged and thinking it don't apply to you. It do apply to you. I need you guys to